These are my family.
So we're stopping in Waco before going to Pelle's Village?
MIDSOMMAR is what you get when you ask the guy who made Hereditary to helm a folk horror slasher movie. Seriously, that was the inception for this film. A Swedish production studio, Be Real Films, approached Ari Aster with this idea after reading the screenplay for Hereditary while he was trying to get it funded, and while he initially wasn't particularly interested, it was a breakup he was going through at the time that, as he put it, gave him a way into this story. MIDSOMMAR is essentially a breakup film in a folk horror dressing, and while it wasn't the same monumental success for A24 that Hereditary was, a $46 million box office run on a $9 million budget is still very strong, especially for a film like this, which is much less accessible than Hereditary, and, you know, that already wasn't the most accessible horror movie. Originally, it was even more so, with the assembly cut clocking in just shy of 4 hours, which was ultimately trimmed down to 2 hours and 51 minutes before Aster was gently pushed by A24 to cut it down some more.
How long is the drive?
About 4 hours.
Oh my God!
This movie was always going to have less broad appeal than Hereditary did, so I can understand why they wanted to do everything they could here. Hell, even Aster himself would go on to call the first cut of the movie unreleasable, but he still lamented needing to make the cuts he did, since many had cascading effects that resulted in entire sequences being removed and certain subplots being either less developed or disappearing entirely. While Aster oversaw the theatrical cut we wound up getting, which was almost a half hour shorter than the one he wanted to release, that 171-minute cut did wind up seeing the light of day, with the director's cut of the film premiering only a month after the theatrical release, which I don't think I've ever seen happen before. I've got some things to say about the differences between these two cuts, because while they're not fundamentally different films, it is a noticeably different experience depending on which version you go with. I'm going to save most of that for after I'm done talking about the film's overall story, but if you want to skip to that section, I'll have a dedicated chapter that you can go to. The director's cut is ultimately Ari's vision for the movie and what he would have released if he'd gotten no notes back, so that's the version I'll be talking about until we get to the comparison section. Since it was released only a month after the theatrical version, and it's the only cut that comes with A24's collector's edition release, it seems like that's the right way to handle this. As far as I'm aware, the only 4K release of the theatrical version is this Canadian one, so if you wanted to find it, there you go. I was maybe naively surprised to see how much of a landslide win Hereditary got when I put up a poll asking what your favorite Ari Aster film was, because to me, well, I'm not sure I can say I have a clear favorite of his, because I love all three of his films so far. I think MIDSOMMAR is Aster's most well-made film to date. From the gut-wrenching opening scene through the increasingly nauseating film about life's darkest moments being manipulated by those who know how to take advantage of vulnerability, the really upsetting portrayal of a relationship far past its expiration date but which was cuffed and bound by tragedy and poor communication, all the way to the haunting conclusion of Dani's story, I find MIDSOMMAR to be nothing less than a masterpiece, a truly brilliant film from a director who is able to convey challenging human emotion in such a visceral manner, and one which features some breathtaking performances and imagery that, to me, mark the technical high point of Aster's career so far. I teased this video over a year ago, as I had fully intended on making it last summer, but things got away from me and I realized I had way more to say about the movie than I had time for during my transition to this being my full-time job. But now that I've settled in and the time of year has crept up again, along with the release of Eddington just on the horizon, I'm glad to finally be sharing my thoughts on this insanely complex film. Sorry it took me so long, but let's take a look at Ari Aster's 2019 folk horror trauma breakup film, MIDSOMMAR.
It's sort of a crazy 9-day festival my family's doing. Lots of pageantry and special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
Something that I really like about this movie is that if you pay attention to the artwork, you can basically spoil the whole thing for yourself right off the bat. The very first frame shows you everything that is going to happen, and they do this a few more times, in particular with one subplot involving Christian and Maya, one of the Horga women. Just a cool touch that gives a sense of this being a fable of sorts, which I really enjoyed. That aside, I am very comfortable saying that MIDSOMMAR has one of the strongest opening sections of any horror movie in recent memory, and brings some of that signature Ari Aster dread that made moments like the car scene in Hereditary iconic. That first frame of the story splits apart, and it's this great contrast of the bright and colorful artistry into the cold, dark night of these still shots through bleak, snowy forestry. Midsommar does something that you don't see very often, focusing almost entirely on broad daylight for the setting of the horror, which works so perfectly for the story that they're telling. Having our introduction to Dani be characterized by such bleak darkness makes us feel somewhat at ease once the warmth of the summer daylight in Hälsingland comes, but that light is something that winds up being extremely deceptive, so setting it up in such a way that Hälsingland will, at least at first, feel very peaceful in contrast to what we initially get, pulls the audience into Dani's shoes and lulls us into a false sense of security. The transition into the story of the film is brilliant, with those eerie shots of the woods with a ghostly song that will come back around later in the film being interrupted by a startlingly loud phone call. We meet Dani as she sat in her apartment alone, worrying about an ominous email she received from her bipolar sister who's been in a particularly bad state as of late. The sense of unease that's established by that email is cranked up in a beautifully simple way by doing nothing more than showing a brief shot of Dani's parents asleep in their bed back home, and that, along with the implication of what Dani's sister is planning, plants this seed of dread that is going to explode in less than 10 minutes. One of the things that always blows me away about Ari Aster's writing is how well he's able to convey undertones in character interactions that actually let you pull way more out of what's happening if you fully engage yourself in all the little nuances of it. And this phone call that Dani makes to her boyfriend Christian is the first example of that in a film that is stuffed to the brim with that sort of thing. I love when people are able to make conversations where the words being spoken are not the important part of the interaction. There's this immediate sense of history between them that sells that these are two people in a relationship that exists outside of the story we're watching unfold, and it also sets up how poorly these two communicate with each other. With a breakup being the thing that Aster said brought him into the story, it's no surprise that a relationship at the end of its rope is one of the main points of focus, and the way he portrayed this stage of their relationship is not only brilliant, but it's something that feels so raw and genuine because of the fact that this was the story he was using to work through something like this himself. Hopefully it wasn't as bad as Dani's and Christian's though. All of these little details, like Christian asking if they'd made plans and Dani responding with this.
Oh. Did we talk about doing something tonight?
I mean, not concretely, but I just wanted to see.
That's a perfect setup for one of the main things about their relationship, that being that Christian is very distant and uninvolved and forgetful and unattentive, and all the while, Dani gives him a hell of a lot of rope to work with and will give a ton of leeway with this kind of thing. We know that Christian initially agreed with Dani when she said that Terry's email seemed different from the others she sent, but this time around, he starts talking about it like it's the same as all the others and telling her it's another cry for attention that Dani keeps allowing her sister to pull from her.
Even you said that this email seemed different.
Yeah, right, but is it though, really?
That little touch is a great reflection of how tapped out of things Christian is, where he was clearly just humoring her by agreeing earlier in the hopes that he could get back to hanging out with Mark. I'm gonna try and not spend too much time on one phone call, because if I approach the whole movie like this, we'll be here for way too long, but suffice it to say, this conversation they have has a ton of depth to it, and it's ridiculously well written and performed. I'll talk more about their dynamic in a little bit, but for now, all that's important to have established is that Christian is very clearly tapped out of it, and the whole thing is really hanging by a thread. We see Dani make a phone call to one of her friends, very upset after the call because she's panicking, thinking that she's pushing Christian away by leaning on him too much, all the while fishing for her meds to help ease her mind. The setup here is really great because you have these three moving parts that would completely fall apart if one of them wasn't present, that being the email from Terry. If we didn't have that context, then it could have entirely been possible that Dani was leaning on Christian too hard and pushing him away, but with the context of her sister sending something as frightening as that, and him still acting the way he does, and then seeing her turn the blame of the situation onto herself, It's so good, and it's also just really goddamn sad.
What if I have overwhelmed him and he thinks that I just have too much baggage?
This is where we then meet Christian as he's out with his friends Josh, Mark, and Pelle, and we get it confirmed that yes, he is indeed tapped out of the relationship and has been expressing his desire to get out of it for a while now.
Okay, well then you can bitch to us about how much you regret it for that day, and then we'll remind you again that you've been wanting out of this stupid relationship for like a year now.
Everything that we hear between these two during this introductory scene is just red flag after red flag, with his only response to the idea of breaking up with her being this.
What if I regret it later and I can't get her back?
You don't want her back.
I might.
It's not the strongest reason to stay with someone, and his friends are trying to push and coax him into cutting that thread, and I'd say if they stayed at this point, the relationship would probably have been over within another week or two. At least I hope it would have been. These things can be very messy. The thing that makes the opening section of Midsommar genuinely perfect is how it's topped off, with Christian receiving another phone call from Dani, and man, there is a way that Ari Aster portrays raw grief that I think may be more realistic than anyone else going now, aside from the people who make Succession. And I shit you not, every time I watch this movie and hear what comes from Christian's phone when he answers Dani's call, I get full body chills and my chest tightens up. I can feel it physically closing in on me.
Hey. Dani. Babe.
This whole thing has been so uneasy and uncomfortable, and while you're getting sucked into the really terrible place that these two are at in their relationship, there's that email from Terry looming in the background of every moment, and the reveal of what's happened is gutting. The sudden horror of that call from Dani opening up to this sequence of emergency services at her parents' house while the sickening score that sounds like distorted sirens comes through is horrifying. And as we begin to piece together what happened when we see the tubes attached to the exhaust pipe of a car, that sinking feeling just gets worse and worse. Terry's email, like Dani feared, was indeed different from the ones we know she sent in the past, and it seems that whatever she was dealing with became too much for her, and she decided that her parents were going to come along. They were all found dead from CO2 poisoning, with Terry being found with a tube taped directly to her mouth, which is a horrible detail, especially with the vomit on her shirt. It's just... this scene is a lot. All of that being said, the thing that makes this such a perfect opening is what directly follows that reveal, wrapping up everything that just happened in a haunting bow and setting us up for an unbelievable story. Christian's body language as he walks to her house is just, oh my god, look, this poor dude, like, Christian sucks, but holy shit, for someone at this state of the relationship where like he's on the cusp of breaking up with her and then getting that phone call and realizing the situation that it's in now, he plays it so well, and the closer for this opening sequence shows him holding Dani as she wails in terror and trauma and icy grief, and the camera pushes forward out into the billowing snowstorm outside before the opening credits show, and we get a little title card that feels like the movie saying, "Bet you're paying attention now." It's a brilliant way to open the story up, with that final moment having so much going on, because not only has Dani just lost her sister and both of her parents in one of the worst ways you possibly could, but now we're also having it settle in what this implies for their relationship. They felt pretty much done, but a breakup is going to generally be the last thing you'd want after something like this. You don't want to lose anything else after a loss as substantial as this. Christian seemed to be on the edge of leaving, but now he knows damn well that he can't do that, so it's this incredibly layered moment of terrifying grief and a dead relationship that now absolutely will be kept on rotten life support to no one's benefit. There's just so much going on here, so many moving parts and little details that all contribute to this harrowing scene. And it's only the first 10 minutes of the movie! Them now being locked into this relationship by something like what happened to Dani is such a perfect setup for the rest of the film, because we know how terrible things already were, and there's no way this is going to improve anything. They're both trapped now. Dani doesn't even know she is. She's still gonna rely on him. It's, oh, man. Before we move into the rest of the film, I'm going to take a moment to talk about the score for Midsommar, which was done by Bobby Krilik, who also goes under the name the Haxan Cloak when he's not composing for film. I briefly mentioned that the strings he wrote for the reveal of what's happened with Dani's family sounded like sickening sirens, and that was something that was fully intentional and meant to sort of cause this bleeding effect between the soundtrack and the on-screen events. Krilik's score for the film is astoundingly good, going from these sorts of terrifying string sections and culminating in the punch in the face with the title card, to the more subtle and ambient music he wrote for other sequences like the Atastupa ritual. It is such an emotional and engrossing score, and one of the things it does so well is reflect the deceptive nature of the film's daylight setting for the horror, where a lot of the music is very bright and happy sounding if you were to just like pass by it while it's playing. My bunny rabbit just ran into the piano. You good, buddy? Why'd you do that? Yeah, so if you were to just like walk by while this music was playing, it sounds very bright and happy, but there's something that's keeping it from ever actually feeling peaceful. Like there's something hiding between the notes that really wants you to focus on the major key and not pay attention to what it's actually doing. Like the real soundtrack is hiding inside of what's being played through the speakers. It's really cool. It lulls you in, wrapping you up in the soundscape, and I don't think there's any more of a brilliant example of this than the track that accompanies the final scene, but we'll get to that later. Aster wrote the screenplay for Hereditary while listening to the Haxan Cloak's 2013 album Excavation, and if you listen to that album, you'll very quickly see how it helped guide Aster through this film's development. There's this great blending of electronic music with much more traditional stuff, which came about from extensive research into traditional Icelandic, Scandinavian, and Swedish folk music, and the result is a really disorienting, unsettling, but also hauntingly beautiful soundtrack. It's not only the music of the film that makes the auditory side such a treat, because the sound design in Midsommar is something that I don't hear talked about much, but I genuinely think it's got some of the best work in that regard that I've ever experienced in a movie. I'm gonna sound like a bit of a broken record here, because the sound design, like the score and the look and the feel of the movie, presents this really uncanny middle ground between being really peaceful and feeling like someone is using that peace to hide their real intentions from you. Like, you look over here, listen to the nice pretty grass and the forks on the plate. You chill out over there. It's gonna be okay. From the moment they shut off the car and step out into Hälsingland for the first time, the quiet stillness of this place is just wonderful. People's voices sound so soft, you hear that distinct quality to when you're far away from the sounds of the industrial world, and something like footsteps sound 100 times louder than when you're used to, but still very calming to listen to. When the Horgas arrange a meal, they always wait for one person at the head of the table to lift their cutlery off the plates before doing so themselves, and they do this in a wave across the table. It just sounds so incredibly satisfying. The first time they take mushrooms, there's this warm, breezy quality that you can hear become louder and louder as the trip intensifies. It's also lush and comforting, but it's also rather unsettling, because there are things that you'd expect to hear that more often than not, you just don't. The sounds of the wind in the grass, for example, are entirely absent, and considering the ridiculous attention to detail in Aster's work, I'm confident this wasn't something that was overlooked, but instead a very intentional decision to try and suck out some of the more peaceful elements that should be present in the sound design. You really get this sense of being sucked into a world that's being controlled and manipulated through the smallest of touches like that, and while it's not something you'll necessarily notice right away, the effect it has on the feeling of being in Hälsingland is strong. The soundscape overall is just really great, and yet another puzzle piece that helps in building this overall feeling of deceptive calmness. While we're on the topic of aesthetics, I would be a maniac if I didn't sit here and gush about how insanely well shot this is. Cinematographer Pelle Pogrzelski has worked with Aster on all of his films so far, and there's a damn good reason they keep working together. This is such an enchanting movie that plays like a fairy tale, and a big part of that is the incredibly elegant look and feel of it, with this sense of drifting artistry coming through every frame. The aerial shots stand out a lot of the time and do a great job of highlighting the very ritualistic way of life for the Horgas, with tables being laid out in runes, for example, and there's also this really beautiful sense of connection that's brought about from these sorts of images that helps to set up the things that will pull Dani in as the story goes along. Instead of seeing each of these people as individuals, these sorts of shots help build up this feeling of community. It's very important. The slow tilting of the camera while they lift their cutlery, the twisting as the group approaches Hälsingland, which creates this great feeling of unease as they enter a new world, the sort of ant colony look that's evoked as we watch them walk in lines, indicating how they're entirely under the control of the Horgas before they even know anything is amiss. It's fantastic. The film is shot in the same 2:1 aspect ratio that Aster has been using since Hereditary, and that allows for landscapes to breathe properly without making more intimate scenes feel like they're being crushed into the frame. Same aspect ratio of The Northman. I really like the sorts of framing that this brings out. It's just a gorgeous movie, and it's got that unique aspect of being almost entirely in daylight, which they bring about with this great dreamy summer afternoon haze that complements the film's tone wonderfully. There's also this beautiful flowing fairy tale look to things, with the dance towards the end of the movie being a fantastic example of that sort of presentation. It's so colorful and vibrant, full of motion and life. It's just a really gorgeous movie.
I know I overreacted, but I've been trying to pull myself back up, and I've been trying to deal with this panic and my fears. I didn't mean to put pressure on you.
All right, with that, let's return to the film's story, picking up with Christian and Dani sometime after what happened, where she learns that he's leaving for a month-and-a-half-long trip in 2 weeks that he had only ever mentioned in passing as being something that could be cool to do sometime.
I told you I wanted to go to Sweden.
Oh, well, you said it would be cool to go.
Yeah, and then I got the opportunity and I decided
Look, I
to
don't
do
mind
it.
you going. I just wish you would have told me, that's all.
If that phone call earlier was a way to whet the palate on the nature of their relationship, the conversation that they have after returning from the party is the appetizer of the horrifically toxic dynamic between these two. Throughout the film, Christian is dismissive. He's absent. He doesn't pay attention. He forgets her birthday and then tries to play it off like he didn't. And what makes it so much worse is that anytime Dani tries to bring anything up with him, he immediately starts playing the victim and manages to make her apologize for things she's not even doing wrong.
Please, I'm not trying to attack you.
It
I'm not.
really feels like you are.
Well then I'm sorry. I just got confused. I'm sorry.
No. We got a new bunny. He's only like 2 months old, and he hasn't been fixed yet, and he keeps trying to hump the older one. Leave him alone.
When you casually gift me an impromptu bouquet of flowers, that just makes me think, how and when am I supposed to pay that back?
I picked those on a whim.
Oh, don't try to tell me that you had no ulterior motive.
Yeah, what
your
motive
birthday,
do I have?
the day after I didn't get you something?
She's a people pleaser and doesn't want to rock the boat, so while she doesn't entirely let him off and does still stand her ground at times, she never goes the whole way and will always back off before things get fully heated. This sequence is so difficult to sit through because we can feel that dynamic that was there at the beginning, but even more pronounced than it was before, where she's being very reasonable here about it, and Christian is entirely unwilling to extend any sort of olive branch to her or take any accountability for the things he's being shitty about, and you get this sense of her trying so hard to make this work and not seem like she's attacking him for something that she absolutely has a right to be upset about.
I think it's great that you're going to Sweden. I do. Are you going for your thesis? It can be inspiring, right?
It's not until she gets entirely overwhelmed by the situation and the panic that's setting in about their relationship and starts breaking down crying that he's willing to have any sort of conversation. It's a really painful portrayal of this sort of dynamic that's realized far too well, and of course a massive part of why this works is the absolutely stellar performances in MIDSOMMAR, which I'm gonna pause once again to talk about.
I know I overreacted, but I've been trying to pull myself back up, and I've been trying to deal with this panic and my fears. I didn't mean to put pressure on you or to blame you for anything. I just got crazy for a second, and I didn't mean to project. I'm sorry.
Aster's films tend to be very emotionally heavy and complex, and getting actors who are able to portray not just the outward emotions of their characters, but the histories of dynamics and underlying details is extremely important. Florence Pugh in the lead role of Dani delivers one of the most brilliant performances in recent memory, with her ability to deliver on what this character needed being something that I'm quite honestly blown away by. The hyperventilating panic that comes about many times feels so uncomfortable and sickening, but what makes me love her performance is how good of a job she does at making you care about this character. I feel so bad for Dani throughout the entire runtime, and all these little moments like the way her face drops when Pelle brings up her family early on, or when Mark says the word family while they're tripping on mushrooms and she goes into a panic state, or when Pelle brings up her family again later.
Because I lost my parents too.
What? No, Pelle, that is not what I'm talking about.
I
I'm
know
not
that's not what
talking
you're
about
talking
my
about, but
family.
I
I'm not
lost
talking
my
about my
parents when
family.
I was
I'm
a
talking
little boy.
about...
They burned up
no,
in a
I
fire.
wasn't talking about that.
You'd think something happened to her family or something. I want to emphasize that last one because her reaction during that scene where Pelle tries to connect with her over the death of her parents is so effective, and it just gives this strong sense of her wishing that she could exist in a reality where people would stop bringing it up and feeling like every part of her life, every interaction is all being colored by that horrible tragedy. She's someone who's got some serious issues, but is really trying to get back on her feet and find herself in a better place, but she's also a people pleaser, and especially considering she just went through such a massive change in her life after what happened, she doesn't want another huge change that would come if her and Christian were to split up. Pugh is so intricately emotive in this role, and she adds so much to the film, and it's especially impressive considering how exhausting this must have been. Jack Reynor as Christian is also fantastic, and I don't think he gets quite enough credit for how insanely good he is here. He doesn't have as many explosive moments as Dani does, but that's also because his character is just a lot less open to the audience than Dani is, because she really is the eyes through which we experience this story for the most part. He does a great job of playing this dismissive asshole who is willing to fuck over his friends for his own gain, is unwilling to be available for his partner when she needs him, but also selfishly will not leave the relationship out of worry that he'll maybe regret it. Now, I do think it's important to note that there are moments in this film where I absolutely do sympathize with him, particularly as we get towards the end of the movie, and also, while he is a fucking asshole, I do think that there's some level of sympathy to be had for him from the angle of him feeling like he was at the end of this relationship and probably would have called it in the next few weeks, but then the horrible tragedy made it so that he absolutely cannot leave now. I don't know, it's a shitty situation. William Jackson Harper as Josh gave another really great performance, despite him not getting quite as much screen time as some of the others. It's one of the reasons I like the director's cut so much, because he gets more to do. Josh is the one who brought about this trip, as he's planning on studying European MIDSOMMAR traditions for his thesis and offered for his friends to come along. He's pretty much entirely focused on academia, with that side of things consuming him and often making him behave in ways that are not considerate to the things going on in people's lives, like how he immediately shifts Christian's concerns about his relationship with Dani into a push to focus more on school, which I can imagine from the way his character acts throughout the rest of the movie. It's not the first time he's done this.
Do you think that there is a masochistic part of you that is playing out this particular drama to avoid the work you actually need to be doing?
My favorite thing about his character is that at the start, he doesn't seem all that bad, but as it goes on, you get this icky feeling that he's entirely interested in the traditions of these communities from an academic perspective, instead of his interest coming from being genuinely drawn to their cultures and wanting to better understand them. There's a leechy quality to the way he behaves throughout the film, with him wanting to sort of extract information from them without regard for the sacrility of these things in their eyes, and the more you see him behave this way, the more you start to dislike his character. That's not to say he's void of genuine interest here, because I don't think that's the case at all. He clearly does respect them and their traditions, but in doing his thesis on them, he's blinded by academic pursuit, and this only becomes more true after Christian threatens his work, which causes him to become desperate and start behaving in a more egregiously disrespectful way. Every time someone is talking about some tradition that you can tell means a lot to them, he's only interested in being able to write it down. Another thing that makes him seem like quite a dick as the movie goes on is how he doesn't warn the others about the Adastupan, which is a ritual that comes from Norse history, and while there isn't a ton of historical documentation to prove that this ever actually happened, historically the idea was that this ritual existed for elderly people to relieve some of the burden from their communities by taking themselves out at a certain point so as to not take up precious resources or require care. For this fictional community, there's the addition of age basically being treated like seasons, with the first 18 years of life being seen as spring, 18 to 36 being summer, 36 to 54 being autumn, and 54 to 72 being winter, at which point those who reach the age of 72 willingly sacrifice themselves to avoid going through the more brutal parts of aging and give their lives back to nature gracefully. In all honesty, I think there actually is something rather beautiful in that idea, but Josh not warning the others about what they were going to see if they chose to attend the ritual was a massively inconsiderate and dickish move, especially in Dani's case, not only because assuming that she'd be interested in seeing something like this is not cool, but also because even if Dani would normally be more open to something like this, which I don't imagine she would be just based on the characterization throughout the movie, not warning her about a ritual involving people taking themselves out when she went through what she did is 10 times worse. No matter what the motivation is here, no matter if it's some sacred honor for them, as it is, she is nowhere near being in the place to see this, and Josh is a fucking asshole for letting her go into it blind. I also love how his character is used to fully illustrate the kind of person Christian is, with Christian eventually deciding that he's going to do his thesis on the Horga, which is a really shitty thing to do to someone who considered him a friend. The scene where Josh finds out about this is fantastic, and you get this great sense of history between them, and it also just shows how selfish Christian really is, especially with the way he then goes on to present this to the others like this is a friendly and entirely innocent thing that's going on. It's just a coincidence.
You're splitting it with Josh as well.
Yeah, I already told him I'm totally fine with that.
What makes it even worse is the way he talks about Josh after the Ruby Rotter, a sacred book for the Horgas, goes missing, and Christian just throws away any history that he had with Josh as he sees an opportunity to gain some good favor from the Horgas and wipe his hands clean of any bullshit.
And if he did take that book, I just pray you understand we don't associate as friends of his or collaborators or anything. We would just be so embarrassed to be connected to this in any way, shape, or form.
The way that Josh gets desperate to make his thesis even better after Christian reveals what he's doing was something that I thought was handled very well, with him being given a hard no about taking photos of the Ruby Rotter and then sneaking in at night to do it anyway, which is what ultimately leads to his demise. It's a great spot in the story as well, because at this point the Horgas still don't want to reveal to the others the sort of danger they're actually in, so they say the book went missing the night prior to try and make the others think that Josh took off with it to explain his disappearance.
He and your other friend, they both disappeared the same day. You see how it looks?
It's good stuff. Josh is such a great character to have in this film, not only because of all the things I just talked about, but because of how him being allowed to even do this in the first place makes it feel like none of these people were ever intended to leave, which is something that Dani brings up during one of her arguments with Christian.
They're doing pagan rituals. People are jumping off cliffs. They depend on no one knowing about this ever.
Yeah, when you think about it like that, their very presence here with the Horgas should be a red flag for all of them, considering how much of this needs to be kept under wraps. Josh also has one of the most disturbing deaths of the entire movie, where Ari's proclivity to head trauma rears its ugly face when Josh breaks in to take a picture of the Ruby Rotter and gets whacked in the head with a giant hammer. What makes the way Ari goes about moments like this so effective is perfectly exemplified with Josh's confused, horrified moaning as he lays on the ground afterwards. You can tell that his brain has just been like muddled and fucked up by that hit, but it still knows that something is wrong, so it's like his brain is whimpering in terror after what just happened. Benny, do not fuck your brother. Benny, hey, stop it. God damn. Shame the horny bunny. Shame the horny bunny. The great Will Poulter is here as well, playing the comic relief of the film, Mark, who's just so goddamn entertaining.
Last summer, a record number of people got tick-borne encephalitis.
What the fuck? Are you serious?
One of the things that's becoming more clear as Aster's career goes on is how good he is at handling humor, and Will makes himself a great vehicle for a lot of the movie's humor.
See, you could be getting that girl pregnant right now.
Having someone like this in a movie that's dealing with very serious subject matter does put you at risk of having the immersion broken or the weight of the story lessened, but they don't go so far with Mark as to make him feel cartoonish. He's just an idiot who is mostly interested in going on this trip because of the Swedish women.
Oh my God, the women here. What is it that makes them hotter?
He's always vaping in the background, which makes him feel so out of place and always gets a good chuckle out of me. And it's another way in which the movie makes it feel like, well, this group has been welcomed here. They're not really supposed to be here at all. He's really just bumbling his way through the whole thing, pissing on an ancestral tree where ashes are being placed, not being able to read the room at any time, and being so driven by his dick that I can imagine you could tape a printed photo of a Swedish woman to a meat grinder and he'd go right at it without a second thought.
What do you think that guy's reaction would be if I just put my finger in his butt right now?
While we don't see his death, what we do see implies that he got it pretty rough. He eventually gets pulled away by a Horgo woman who's been eyeing him in one of the funniest interactions of the whole movie.
I'll show you.
Okay, sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, great. I'll be back, I guess. She's gonna show me.
I love his line delivery there. The next we see of him is his skinned face being worn by one of... Hey, leave the pretzels alone. Don't throw... You're a fucking nuisance today, Benny. Dude, There's a bag of pretzels and a hairdryer on the couch and he just threw it off. He's just knocking shit off the couch for no reason. Stop throwing shit. It's not yours to throw. The next we see of him is his skinned face being worn by one of the guys who confronts Josh in the temple. And this dude gets so disrespected in death by having his face put on this mock-up body and a jester hat placed on his head.
What are the kids playing?
Skin the fool.
Skin the fool.
Yeah.
One more character I want to touch on is Pelle, played by Wilhelm Blomgren, who is an insanely memorable villain. Largely because he's never once portrayed in the way you'd expect to see a villain in a horror movie. And he's also a perfect example of how this movie is not only a story about Dani being manipulated, but also a story meant to make the viewer feel like they're being manipulated. Pelle is a very soft-spoken, seemingly kind, loving, compassionate dude who stands out as being a lot more mature and calm than any of the others in the group. He's very reasonable in his handling of both Josh and Christian doing their thesis here, being fair on both ends of the stick. He's patient with the cultural misunderstandings in moments like when Mark unknowingly desecrates a sacred site, and he just seems more down to earth than the others. He's also the only one who actually allows Dani to open up when she's so used to being shut down and disregarded when she tries to do so, and he's even the one who reminds Christian that it's Dani's birthday because that moron completely forgot. On the surface, he seems to be a decent dude, but if you pay close attention to what he's doing or saying at any given moment, and especially once you have the context of why he actually brought them here, well, he's definitely not a decent dude. It becomes pretty clear at a point that he is pursuing Dani, holding her hand and not being concerned about Christian coming into the room. He also kisses her towards the end after she becomes the May Queen, and I love Dani's reaction to this because, well, in retrospect, it's easy to see what Pelle's intentions were. He's subtle enough throughout the film that this comes as a complete surprise to her. I'm sorry if you can hear the bunny running around. He's got tunnels and toys and stuff, and he's a baby. He's having fun. Hi! You can see on her face that she's just totally thrown off by that because, well, we could read that earlier moment as him making an advance. I actually didn't see it like that the first time I saw the movie. This community that Pelle is a part of is so driven by connection and closeness to each other, so I just read this as him behaving in the way that he was taught to when growing up, where the boundaries are a little flimsier and people here seem more open with one another than we're used to. He's this presence always hanging around in the movie, pushing toward his ultimate goal of Dani being brought into the community, knowing how vulnerable she is at this point of her life. What I find so fascinating about him is that we don't actually know one way or another if he sees this as something he's doing to take advantage of her being vulnerable, or if he genuinely does believe that this is what's best for her because it's what he was raised in person, and assuming he was telling the truth, it's the thing that he claims to have saved him when he went through something terrible.
My parents, they burned up in a fire. Yet my difference is I never got the chance to feel lost because I had a family here.
His motivations are unclear, but his goals aren't. I believe that Pelle always had a thing for Dani and saw this as an opportunity to coax her into joining his community with the hope that at the end of all of it, they would wind up together and live out their days here. They never give him a straight up villain moment, with the closest points of his true nature showing are when he kisses Dani and when he's joining in with the others during the sacrifice at the end. One more thing before the film's overall story, I want to touch on some of the smaller details throughout the film that really stood out to me. One of the big ones I already hinted at with them giving away a lot of what happens in the story through the illustrations we see, with that one at the start showing everything that will happen in the movie, and another one we see which reveals the spell that Maya is attempting to place on Christian with the goal of coaxing him into mating with her later on. Aster tends to like dealing with stories that have predetermined fates, and where characters are being controlled or manipulated in ways they're not aware of, which has been something present in every one of his movies so far. We learn that Maya actually chose Christian as her mate before they even arrived here, having been shown a photo of him, which is why we see her amping herself up when the group first arrives. You can see this whole ritual play out during the course of the film, with her placing a love rune under his bed, putting one of her pubes into his food, and you'll also notice that his drink seems to have a bit more red tint to it than the others. I guess you could call it a Bloody Mary if you were feeling adventurous. There's some foreshadowing of where this story is going, right after the cold open with this painting above Dani's bed showing a blonde woman with a crown on her head reaching up to a bear, which ties directly into the end. There's a great moment right after Christian tells the group that he invited Dani, where Mark wants to talk to him privately and passes it off as wanting to get Christian to look over some of his work, and then he closes the laptop and almost forgets it before remembering he has to keep up appearances. You have a reflection of Pelle's draw to Dani and the dynamic between Ingmar, Connie, and Simon, with Ingmar talking about how he met Connie in a way that makes it sound like they were dating, which Connie quickly corrects, and then they both give him a really suspicious look.
Yeah, we actually asked Ingmar to officiate the wedding.
Really?
Nah.
That little detail is actually really disturbing because it makes it seem like Ingmar brought Connie and Simon along as a sort of revenge for having not gotten his way with her. Dude is the ultimate incel. God, I love how much you can get from these characters just from their performances, especially considering how little time we actually spend fleshing them out directly. It's incredible writing. The song, which is sung during one of the morning rituals, is the same one we heard during that eerie montage of the snowy forest at the start, tying what happened here in with what happens later in a really unsettling way. Also on that topic, there's this very strange shimmering effect cast on certain surfaces during that ritual that doesn't seem to be coming from anywhere in particular. Like, you're seeing a reflection of some of the cosmic practices. I loved how the guy who lost his shit over Mark pissing on the tree had a particularly visceral reaction because he knew he was going to sacrifice himself very soon and that he would be joining his ancestors there. So he's seeing this not only as a disrespect to the people who came before him, but also sort of in a panicked headspace, thinking that that's where he's going to be very soon and it's being desecrated.
Is he gonna be okay? I mean, yeah. He's a very sensitive guy. It's a big week for him.
You had Connie's body being seen decorated with the same stuff that the kid had on during that weird water ritual early on, which is further indication on top of how her body looks that she was drowned in the water as a sacrifice. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention that you can see Terry's horrifying face staring down from the trees toward the end of the movie, which is fucking haunting. There's so many of these little details, and I pick up on something new every time I watch it, which shouldn't come as a surprise since Aster's screenplays are some of the most detailed and meticulous I've ever read. It's truly insane how much thought this dude puts into his writing. We learn that this community practices inbreeding to birth their oracles, whose art is interpreted by the elders for their sacred texts, but of course inbreeding isn't something that they can do regularly for everyone since it does result in severe birth defects. So they're driven to pull in outsiders to bring about more babies, which was part of their motivation for letting this group come along. The big thing though is that this is a ritual they do in which 9 human sacrifices are required with the hopes of bringing about prosperity for the Horgas. It's clear that once Dani decided to come along, there were more than enough people for this ritual to play out, and since Pelle already had a thing for Dani, the plan is to coax her into becoming a part of their community, and that manipulation of Dani is the core of what's going on here. Pelle is taking advantage of the fact that he knows how poorly Christian treats Dani and that she just recently lost her family and is feeling extremely alone, so she's more likely to fall into the arms of people who offer the connection that has been ripped from her life. Family is something that sets Dani off very quickly at the moment, which we see early on during the first time they take mushrooms, where she seems to be having a decent enough time with them at first, but that moment Mark says the forbidden word, it sets her off right away.
You guys are like my family.
Side note, the trip sequences in this movie are some of the best I've ever seen, and between this and Beau is Afraid, I have absolutely zero doubt that Ari Aster has had some bad trips before. The visuals aren't overblown or goofy, the sound mixing has some changes to reflect the sensory impacts of taking substances like this, but once again, without going overboard with any of it, and the way he portrays the mental state of this sort of thing is spot on. And of course, it's also something he uses to make these characters have an even harder time than they already were. The soundscape becomes more sort of sparkly and soft, if that makes any sense. I love Mark's commentary while they're laying by the tree, wanting others to do as he does to make him feel more comfortable.
I'm just gonna lay down, okay?
Yeah, do that.
Everybody else lay down.
There are these really great stretches in the audio for the dialogue that are very subtle, but they have a massive impact.
Promise you it's okay.
I'm not okay.
And the way faces will subtly shift and morph results in some very unsettling moments that serve to just make me feel so bad for the people who are very far from being in the right state of mind to be taking substances like these. The tree bark flowing like a river, the branches dancing around, the grass growing through Dani's hand and showing the one positive moment of feeling connected to nature before things go bad. It's all so enchanting. Anyway, on the note of Dani's manipulation, it's something that's going on through the course of the whole movie, with Maya's push to mate with Christian being a big part of it, because we see how Christian isn't entirely opposed to her and doesn't do a good job of hiding it, but it's some of the other moments that I found more compelling. While making it more apparent that Christian isn't interested in sticking with Dani is an effective way to do this, it was the way that the Horgas made themselves seem like a home that Dani was welcomed in that I really liked, because that's more in line with the overall tone of the movie being that deceptive warmth. Them bringing her in to cook with them, calling her beautiful, and putting one of their aprons on her to welcome her into their traditions, Pelle giving her a proper birthday gift with his drawing that shows so much more care than Christian's last-second birthday cake that he had to be reminded about, the way they treat her when she becomes the May Queen, and that thing they do that I find to be a genuinely beautiful thing, where when someone is feeling intense pain, instead of telling them it's going to be okay or something like that, they just join them in their wailing to show them that they're not alone in what they're going through, that there is a family here that feels what you feel and will sit with you in it. Dani's feelings are validated by this stuff, so much more than they have been by anyone around her for a long time, and she feels less alone in her emotions than she has, and that's a huge turning point for her. We know that she's feeling like the friend group is only tolerating her having come along, as we see that nightmare she has of all of them abandoning her in the middle of the night. Then there's all the little details that push the idea of a connected community of people, which is clearly compelling to Dani in her current state, like them talking about how the babies are raised by everyone here, for example.
The babies are raised here by everyone.
Wow. You want this?
The Atastupa is another one of those, where it's indicating a sense of set role and responsibility that eliminates a lot of the unknowns from the life that Dani is used to. They represent a stable, predefined, and structured life, and with her being such an anxious and traumatized person, that sort of routine, that stability is very comforting because it eliminates one of the main roots of this sort of anxiety coming from the fear of the unknown. When you have a society structured in this sort of way, it feels to Dani that the unknown is no longer a factor. They're also well aware that Dani, while she's far from being on board with staying with them at the time she arrives, is really hanging by a thread, with her relationship with Christian, as unhealthy as it is, being the only real tie that she has to her life back home. This means that if they manage to get Christian to mate with Maya, they'll be killing two birds with one stone, having someone new join them and calling this place home, and also helping to expand their numbers, which Dani will also be able to help with. So they're pulling Dani in and making her feel welcomed while trying to pull Christian away, and all the while just letting this already rotten relationship between the two of them get worse and worse, with the state of things being highlighted in a really upsetting way following the biggest argument they have in the film. It gets nasty, and Christian is really showing how little care he actually has for her.
I feel locked into your debt every time you do something just because. Because
debt.
it's never just because.
Kind. I was being kind.
Okay, fine, I'm the asshole.
Nobody's the asshole.
I clearly am.
And then the next morning they just hug and make up.
I don't want us to be fighting, Christian.
Now, oftentimes this is the sort of thing you'd want to see, but they've been here too many times. It's so clear that they're both just delaying the inevitable. So when they have this interaction that should have been the end of the whole thing, seeing them both not acknowledge it beyond saying they don't want to fight is a really rough moment, especially when they're back to bickering later that same day.
That's rude.
Why would Simon leave without her?
I'm sure it was just a miscommunication.
I could see you possibly doing that.
It's just a very sad state of affairs. Now, in terms of where things go for Christian, while it does shine a light on him not being entirely closed off to the idea of cheating on Dani, his storyline is also designed in a way that's meant to make you empathize with him, even though he's been a massive piece of shit for the whole movie. Midsommar is very much meant to challenge the audience, and this is part of that. We don't see whether or not he agrees or disagrees to the offer of mating with Maya, with his answer being sort of in the middle and leaving it up to us to figure out. But based on the way they go about getting him into this position, I actually think he declined the offer, because they really have to pump him up full of drugs and put him into a state where he has no idea what's going on in order to get him here. After Maya's ritual plays through and during the dance sequence towards the end of the film, Christian is offered another one of their special teas, which he declines at first, as he should. People keep taking psychedelics in this movie when they really shouldn't be, but he's also rather awkward with these people, and when she insists, he just says fuck it and downs the thing. It's yet another scenario where Aster shows his familiarity with bad trips, and it's also where I think Jack Reynor does his best work of the whole movie, both just because of how convincing he is in this confused, frightened state he winds up in, but also because he managed to make me sympathize with a character who I've hated up to this point. When he turns to this dude at the table after Dani has been crowned May Queen, and you can see how scared and disoriented he is.
What's going on?
Like, man, the look on his face there, I cannot help but feel bad for the dude, and it's only just starting for him. It's gonna get so much worse. When Dani gets ridden away for the final part of the ceremony, a path of flowers are laid down for Christian as a part of his end of the ritual. We know from that interaction he had at the table that he is out of his mind. He has no idea what's going on right now. He's in the midst of a mindfuck of a bad trip, and for all we know, they made his tea a lot stronger than the others or added something extra into it, so he's really not doing well. In that sort of confused state, any sort of direction is going to feel like a source of comfort because it's something you can focus on following. So when that path comes down, he just starts walking it because it's the only thing that makes any sense in his reality at this point. And when he reaches his destination, he gets drugged again. As I've said many times in my videos, I hate having to sanitize language. There are certain words that I just can't say or my video will get dinged, and that bothers me because I hate cleaning up language when I'm talking about things that aren't clean. I'm saying this because the scene that follows is Christian being forced into coitus after being drugged and not being able to actually consent to anything. I'm going to avoid talking about this scene too much, mostly because of how much of a nightmare it's going to be to censor it, since it's literally a circle of naked people moaning in unison while being complicit in drugging and forcing Christian to do that. All of that being said, I also can't help but laugh hysterically every time I get to this scene because of how horrifically awkward it is. The look on Christian's face here says it all. That being said, while it's like funny from just like the awkward side of it, it is still horrifying. Like, Christian is being robbed of his agency here, if you will. It's sick. It's following this where Christian starts to notice all of the new decorations that show that whatever the Horgas have been building up to, they have no intent to hide it anymore. One thing I didn't mention about that scene is that Dani actually sees it happening, and of course based on what's happening up to this point and her lack of context, this sends her over the edge into a full-blown panic attack, throwing up, hyperventilating, and that's when that scene I mentioned earlier where all of the others join in her cries of anguish comes, further solidifying that sense of community they've been constructing for her and making her feel seen in a horrifying moment. And the reason I'm mentioning it again now is because when Christian leaves that building, still drugged out of his mind and having just gone through whatever the hell that was, he leaves and hears the painful cries, and I can only imagine how terrifying that must be in this moment. He also finds Simon hung up, having gotten the old Blood Eagle treatment, which is always fun to see. And this is where Christian gets drugged again, and we lead into the final scene of the film, which is the culmination of the ritual meant to bring prosperity to this community of people. 8 of the 9 sacrifices have been selected, with Dan and Ylva being the first 2, Connie, Simon, Mark, and Josh being the next 4. Then there's Ingmar, the one who brought Connie and Simon in, willingly sacrificing himself, and Ulf, the man who lost his shit at Mark earlier for pissing on the sacred tree, doing the same. For the 9th and final sacrifice, Dani will be choosing between Torbjorn, the randomly selected Horga, or Christian, who is completely paralyzed by whatever they blew in his face, but still entirely aware of what's going on, which is a horrifying idea.
You can't speak, you can't move, all right?
Now, the ending of Midsommar has been the point of a lot of discussion, and for good reason. It's pretty loaded in terms of what it has to say about these characters, but the conclusions that people walk away from this with also says a lot about them as individuals, and how susceptible they would be to falling for the tricks of a cult. Dani is more than likely still high on mushrooms, and for all intents and purposes, she is wholly under the influence of the Horgas by this point, with her being in such a susceptible state and then providing her with community while Christian drifted away and him being forced into mating with Maya. Not only is she feeling hatred towards him right now, but she's also being welcomed by the only people to make her feel that way in a very long time. And so of course, she chooses Christian as the 9th sacrifice. The temple, which has been looming in the background the whole movie, is finally opened, and it's revealed to be where the sacrifice will take place, all of the offerings being placed inside of it, Christian joining after being stuffed into the body of a bear. While Christian has been victimized, he's been a real piece of shit the whole movie, constantly gaslighting Dani and treating her horribly, and this is what he gets. Bear with me a moment. The willing sacrifices are given USAP to ease the pain, and the building is set alight, while outside we see the Horgas writhing in the connection that they have to one another as they scream alongside their friends and family in a fervor. And while Dani seems to be struggling at first, the final shot of the movie shows a smile pulling itself onto her face as she finally liberates herself from the horrible person she's been with for so long and finds a new home with these people who showed her actual care. That is the ending that I've heard described to me a few times over the years. Except, I mean, a few notes. One is the music, which is not what I'd describe necessarily as triumphant or liberating. It's got shades of that, sure, but it's colored by something much darker and more dissonant than that. Then there's the fact that despite these people being told that they would feel no pain with the sap they were being given, they almost immediately began shrieking in agony when the fire touched them, which makes the Horgas seem kind of full of shit. And then there's, you know, the small part of a drugged victim being murdered and a traumatized abuse victim being manipulated by an incestuous, murderous cult. This is not a you go girl ending by any stretch of the imagination. Even if you think Christian deserved to die because he was a fucking asshole, which I don't think he did, they should have just broken up. Dani getting to this point was not her finding her agency for the first time, standing tall as her own person and getting back at someone who treated her terribly. It's Dani being manipulated and taken advantage of by a community who lures and kills people for their own gain and commits other atrocious acts. This is the exact opposite of liberation, and the tone of this final scene is absolutely haunting. Dani's not free, she's now in the binds of a cult. She didn't choose her real family, she was forced into it by manipulation. It's so emotionally dense with all of these moving parts between the fervor of the Horgas as their ritual finally plays itself through, the painful screams from the burning building, the very off-putting score, and that grin on Dani's face. The whole thing is just such a powerful sequence that is honestly a perfect ending for this story. I've had a number of people tell me I tear up too easily with movies, but fuck off, I like stories because I like feeling, and so I've got no problem admitting that the emotional fervor of this scene always brings me to tears. It's utterly overwhelming in its intensity and subject matter, and I love it to bits. It's always this shot that really pushes me over the edge. It's just so powerful. This is an ending that's meant to make you feel conflicted and walk away sort of dazed by what just happened, and I feel like the way this was presented accomplished that beautifully and leaves the story on a deeply unsettling note. Now, we may have gone through the whole movie, but I'm not done with Midsommar just yet. I talked about a lot of little details throughout this thing, but the sheer volume of tiny details with tons of meaning in this movie cannot be understated, and I want to go through and take a closer look at the runes that can be found throughout the film because this is something that was given a lot of care. Now, I'm not going to go into copious detail about this since Novum already has a Midsommar video which is way more in-depth than this, and they even got access to some information about the affect that was actually designed for this movie, and I didn't feel right using that information since they were the ones who sourced it. I haven't personally seen Novum's video, but I found it while I was researching the runes in this movie, so go watch that if you want a proper deep dive into that side of things. And pretty much everything else as well. I cannot begin to fathom the amount of work that Novum puts into those videos. I'm just going to go through the ones that I found the most interesting during my own research. So the runes used in this movie are from the Elder Futhark alphabet, as we learn from that moment where Ingmar answers Josh's question about a stone.
Younger Futhark? I think, or is that medieval?
Actually, that is the Elder Futhark.
For an example of just how deeply thought out everything was, the tables were laid out to form the Othilla rune, which represents inherited property, group order, and experience. Not only does that make sense considering this is a gathering of community, but you also have Dan and Ylva's ritual happening here, with them giving themselves up to partially lessen the burden of the others and leaving them to inherit what they will. That's just one that feels like a part of a general community practice for people who lived by this sort of thing, but there's also a lot said in the narrative with them, particularly in terms of the embroidered runes on the clothing at the end. Dani, unlike all of the others here, is wearing the inverse Raido and Dagaz runes, which represents crisis, rigidity, injustice, and death, and ending, limit, completion, and hopelessness, respectively. That is a really disturbing detail because while she's being dressed in lovely clothing and dancing out in the warm sun, she's unknowingly wearing runes that are designed to hearken in only the worst, and she has no idea. The last one I wanted to mention comes up during the hallucination she has of her parents after she wins the dance competition, where they pass her by in the crowd. Her mother is wearing the inverse Ewaz rune, which represents reckless haste, disharmony, mistrust, and betrayal, which was probably the most impactful one we learn about given the context, almost reading like a sort of warning for the deception that Dani is falling for. Again, there is a ton more of this kind of stuff, but Novum's video is gonna be the place to go for that. The last thing I want to talk about is the difference between the theatrical and the director's cut, because this isn't one of those things where it's like 5 minutes longer or anything. This has almost 24 minutes of additional footage. The first time I saw the director's cut, I liked most of the additions early on, but I was thrown off by the added scenes between Christian and Dani that make him even worse than he was in the theatrical version, going from a neglectful asshole to a full-blown gaslighting piece of shit. I didn't like this much because I felt like it was taking away from the subtlety of their relationship at first. But then, upon rewatching both versions recently, I realized that it actually makes way more sense to show how explosive things are, since this is a breakup movie at its core. Seeing these big blowouts and near tipping points for them got me more immersed into the stage of their relationship and made it feel very real and human. These sorts of arguments do happen and are a part of these situations, and not only do these scenes add a lot of context for that, but one of them also makes Dani seem more competent and aware because of that thing that she calls out about it not making sense for them to be allowed to be here.
Why would they trust us? You're opportunistic anthropology students.
Maybe because we're anthropology students, maybe they want someone to document
Are you
this.
fucking blind?
The discussion before they leave also goes from really uncomfortable to flat out sickening in the director's cut. It's not just these scenes that make Christian worse though, because there's also quite a bit more in terms of him messing with Josh's thesis throughout the whole movie, and that whole subplot just holds a lot more weight in the director's cut.
Why are you even in academia? You don't care, which is fine. That is your prerogative. But do not appropriate my actual work for your new shortcut.
You also get more in the way of the Horga's ritual and way of life. These scenes are given more breathing room and detail, and I found that to be a really effective way of immersing the viewer in the culture. Overall, the director's cut is just a more fleshed out and immersive watch, with more additional scenes on top of what I just mentioned, like a very extended car ride with a lot of really interesting interactions.
See that, Pelle? You've managed to brainwash all of your friends.
Josh was already brainwashed when I found him.
To me, the director's cut is just a straight upgrade, and is without a doubt the only version I'll probably watch going forward, unless I'm showing it to someone for the first time, because I know a lot of people already found the theatrical version too long, and if that's the case, I don't imagine the director's cut will save anything. And so that's Midsommar, a brilliant film that started out as a simple folk horror slasher, but became a ridiculously detailed and unsettling look at a horrible relationship that ends on such an off-putting note that never fails to leave me stunned for a moment after it ends. I have revisited this one far more than I have Hereditary, in all honesty, and we still have one more Ari Aster movie to look at to coincide with Eddington's release, and I'm not even sure how to begin approaching that one, but we'll figure something out. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.